So my name is Leila Kambi and I'm the Executive Director of the Namibia Institute. And welcome to another episode of Private Conversation. Today, tonight we're talking about corruption and evaluation. Tonight I'm joined by I'm very popular with before we get into this topic, maybe
Okay, I've been a journalist of my working life, more than 20 years, I would say. And most of my work has been covering the intersection between business and politics. So a lot of my work has really been about governance, corporate governance, political governance.
Nice. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Hopwood, tell us a little bit about you.
Yes, I'm Graham Hopwood. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Public Policy Research. I've done that work since 2008. I'm also a former journalist. Governance, or to put it crudely, anti-corruption work has become a bit of a personal passion project for me. But it is reflected a lot in the IPPR's work. So we have a very strong emphasis, really for more than a decade now, on trying to develop systems and laws and practices that enable us to prevent corruption and fight corruption. And obviously corporate governance is at the heart of that. And as part of that, we have done several surveys and rankings of public enterprises in recent years to try and see what is going on in this really important sector, which is, I think, sometimes still overlooked in many respects.
Thank you, gentlemen. The fireplace conversations really are a platform where we advocate for good governance and hopefully also build capacity. And so that's why we have these conversations to hopefully enlighten boards and to get public engagement, and hopefully people can see the value in good governance. So to dive right in, last episode we talked about public enterprises and the fact that there doesn't seem to be a ministry of public enterprises, and although Louise did she talked quite a bit about what's really happening in the development process of doing things. I just want to ask, maybe from your vantage point, what are some symptoms or red flags suggesting weakened technical leadership or, just political interference in these public enterprises, especially, amidst what's happening, who's hiring and firing boards, we see stuff with NEPA, NAMCO, WR. So maybe just talk to that. Let's start with you.
Okay. Well, I think for me the most crucial thing about what we call state-owned enterprises or parastatals, because one never really is clear where they draw the line between enterprise and just a semi-governmental entity, is that I don't get a sense there's a standard guideline or criteria why SOEs are created and how they should be governed or run as in a uniformed way. They seem to be dependent on the whims of the politicians or the bureaucrats who are in charge at any given time. And the example that you would see is just over the past 10 years or less, you would have noticed late President Kaingo created the state-owned enterprise ministry, and within the past 5 years, that ministry was dismantled, moved or merged with the Ministry of Finance, and just this year we get told, well, all the state-owned enterprises should move back to their line ministries. So what are the standards? What are the guidelines? What's the governance procedure that each one, because certain things are just basic. You have to have bookkeeping done. Your books must be in order. Your books must be audited annually. It must be submitted at a given time. But that doesn't seem to be clear with parastatals. Some of them have gone years without audited financials being made public. And very often when we get them, they are 2, 3, 4, 5 years late.
Right. I'm concerned to hear this because I actually was under the impression of doing better, and I understand that they are sort of, they exist because there's an establishing act, they're formed by an act of, like a piece of legislation.
They basically just ignore the laws, actually.
Well, we do have the Public Enterprise Governance Act, PEGA, which was passed in 2019.
It's just the Governance Act, but each enterprise, I think, is also established because of...
Yes, but at least with that, there was an overarching piece of legislation. I sort of felt we were moving in the right direction in the last 10 years with the establishment of the Ministry of Public Enterprises in 2015, and then, moving on from that, getting the PEGA Act into place, setting up some kind of system where you could see the ministry, even when it was inside the Ministry of Finance, was at least trying to improve the quality of the board, restructure some of the public enterprises. The progress was very slow, but there were moves in the right direction. Yeah. I'm very worried that this decision by the new president has to revert to the line ministry system is going to undo 10 years of maybe what we could say is halting progress in terms of governance in the PE sector, because now every ministry, every company or PE goes back to the situation before 2015, when really there was no scrutiny and oversight in a sort of centralized sense on what was going on. And I think a lot of things were missed, and a lot of scandals and malpractice was developing in that system. And I wonder what will happen now unless we put a different system in place, but I don't hear about that. So these announcements from the new president, I think that decision to put the PEs back in the line ministries has probably not received enough attention. Yeah. We need to look at that and say, well, if something was so wrong with the previous centralizing system, what is going to make this work? And aren't we going back to the bad old days, as it were? So, these are my worries, that we've just basically undone, as I say, 10 years. It might not have been all the progress that we wanted, but there were some definite moves in the right direction.
So what would you propose? I'm thinking, because of the role that the Public Enterprises Ministry played, surely they, even though they don't exist, maybe what the function could then sort of be then decentralized or be given to the line ministry, so that even though there isn't the central board, they could still perform the function. Or what do you think? Or what else would you propose to?
Well, the thing that takes us back to the era of a lot of political interference, where ministers saw it as their oversight role to sort of directly interfere in the runnings of the public enterprises, the board selections, and so on. And I think that generally led to a lot of poor governance. Yeah. So we need to have a frank conversation about where we go now with this. If it's been decided that centralized role under the Ministry of Finance isn't working or isn't appropriate anymore, then we have to replace it with something else. And I don't have a model. I felt it was moving in the right direction. If you remember the high-level panel on the economy in 2020, backed this really and recommended ultimately forming a holding company for the commercial public enterprises, which would have been a way of professionalizing the oversight, removing the possibilities of political interference. Yeah. I felt that was a good suggestion, but now it seems to have been lost and dropped altogether. So we might have to look back at some of the previous ideas and say, look, we need to revisit these.
Yeah. I think Louise confirmed last time that they're still in talks and they're still consulting about that. So they are still looking to hopefully have the holding company.
But the problem is that the Ministry of Finance is no longer even the Ministry of Finance and Public Enterprises. It's just the Ministry of Finance. Yeah. So where does that directorate or department now sit? Yeah. And I think it's a lot of issues have come out of the change in government, which is inevitable, that needs to be clarified. Yeah. And that's one of them. But the sooner we do it, the sooner we clarify the roles, the better.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So clarification of roles for accountability, that's good. Mr. Mufadi.
I wanted to ask you, you've uncovered ethical breaches, conflicts of interest before, like you said. So how does media pressure actually influence, these governance issues, and where does it fall short?
Well, we can, in our country where the media is kind of not given or allowed the space and the tools to operate or to be effective, it often really depends on either a media house or certain journalists to be tenacious, to just keep following an issue.
Why do you say that? Like, what would that look like if you got the space that you're talking about?
Look, we, for instance, do not have easy access to public information. When you go to, let's say, a website of a public enterprise, there's no standardized set of information that you will just easily find with every one of them. Some are so good, you can get all the information at once, and then you go to another, and then there's nothing available. So it's left to journalists who are really able to dig and to talk to their contacts within those organizations. And I think that's the only real room that is there to have pressure brought to bear in the governance of these state entities. And I think that's, for me, is a shortcoming.
Yeah.
That leaves room for, or at least a lot of loopholes for ethical breakdowns.
So transparency, this is what you're saying, and publicly available data. In other words, we don't have proper data. Is that what's that? Do I'm hearing you correctly?
Proper data. There is not even just an obligation on those who are in charge to be open with that information that they have.
Does the PEGA not do that? Or
well, they do ignore it.
Okay, so it's accountability is the issue then. Okay, all right.
You have to remember the example of Air Namibia, because Air Namibia went for more than 10 years without producing annual reports or financials. And that seems to be a classic case of the worst case of poor governance. And you can actually use it as a case study to say, this is what we shouldn't do, the constant changing in the management, the board shifts, the constant financial losses that weren't addressed, the failure to account for massive public subsidies that the taxpayers were paying into Air Namibia over the years. And I know it's an emotional issue, but we can fully understand why it was closed when it was closed, because of the way it was run. And to move forward, we have to do the opposite of Air Namibia, really, I think. And, we have enough bad examples. What we need to move towards is good practice and good examples that we can use.
Certainly so. I mean, even post Air Namibia, you still find cases or instances of state-owned entities that still do not do those basics. The Department of State-Owned Enterprises tells us they will ensure that state-owned enterprises are placed in a position where they are well managed and not presenting a financial burden to the state. How do you explain the case of Midco?
Yeah.
That within the past 4 years, our tax money to the tune of 1.2 billion had been used to bail Midco out. I mean, Midco for me is just a glorified abattoir. We have other abattoir businesses that are thriving, which actually have been supplying the European market better than Midco lately. So how do we explain a Midco failing to that point that we have had to pump in 1.2 billion taxpayer funds.
What do you propose? Like, what is the solution? What can be done? Because I mean, we recognizing that the issues of accountability, and I think in every episode of Fireplace, I talk about accountability, but what could work? Because you would think media could be a channel of accountability and pressure, but you're saying that is also ineffective because you don't have access to information. What do you what can happen?
We should set uniform governance standards. We can't be dismantling an institution that oversees all these parastatals and leave them to the whims of the ministers in charge or the bureaucrats who are in charge of the so-called parastatal at any given time. I think unless we put those at least the minimum accountability standards in place, the media will just be another watchdog which comes in after the fact. But you want the processes to be set and to work in advance, not only to pick up once mistakes are already done.
Yeah. Graham, do you have anything to say to that? And
well,
especially because a way to sort of mitigate corruption, is having disclosures or, reporting channels and so on, which brings in whistleblowing. What can you speak? What can you say with regards to that? Like, what structures can be put in place? I know our act is still not.
The short answer to that is to implement the Whistleblower Protection Act, because the designated entities would probably cover most public enterprises. So they would have to follow the law. They'd have to have an ethics and integrity officer within their system and a reporting system, and an openness to complaints being escalated up to the Whistleblower Protection Office if they weren't dealt with in-house. So, that would solve a lot of the problems if we could just implement that law and make it work in practice. But what I see at the moment is a kind of piecemeal approach. I know some of the public enterprises like NamPower, NamPost, I think NAMRA, have instituted their own sort of internal whistleblower reporting systems and hotlines and that kind of thing. But we hear these things launched with quite a lot of fanfare, but we don't really hear if they're working or if they're being used. And I'd like to know a bit more about whether these internal systems that the PEs deserve credit for introducing are working in practice, or to what extent they are successful. Obviously, it's a highly confidential process, so not too much can be said. So that's the issue there. But I do agree with Tangania that we need some kind of uniform standards across the board, because we probably talk a lot about the commercial PEs, which is about just over 20, I think. But the actual number of PEs, I think according to the Act in 2019, was at just over 70. Yeah. But some people have estimated there's actually 93 or near 100, I think, because you have the commercial, the non-commercial, the regulatory institutions, and then you have a category called others, where you could have put all kinds of semi-government related or sort of slightly government-related bodies, but they probably do receive taxpayer money. So we need to look at the sector holistically as well, because my worry is that we do tend to at least focus a little bit on the commercial ones, but the remaining 50 or 60 or 70, depending on your figures, get very little attention, and they're actually operating under the line ministries all the time. And that's why I'm not convinced by the line ministry system, because the only time we seem to hear about these when there's a big scandal or a corruption case blows up. But if you take a sort of random look at them, quite a lot of them don't really have websites, or they don't have websites that are up to date, and they haven't published their financials or annual reports for years. Now, this is where IPPR and ICG and others can do research and surveys to establish what's going on here, because I think that would be helpful for the new government to know, look, okay, you can put it back in the line ministries, but you've got to make these systems work. You've got to have them all producing annual reports and getting their financials audited and published. Otherwise, we just don't know where we are.
Yeah. I guess the ranking, the project that we're embarking upon should help with that. We'll talk more about that later. So just speaking of access to information and how difficult it is, the restrictions that are there, how can you adapt? How can the media adapt? How can journalists adapt to continue to hold the public enterprises accountable? Besides hustling, because it sounded like you said they must just hustle.
Yeah, I think there are some actions that we can take from our end to improve our work and hold institutions accountable. And one key issue is for journalists to become more focused and experts on a subject. It's of no use if we just have generalist reporters once in a while looking at this story. So we need to improve on our end by having specialists.
Be like thought leaders as well.
No, even just research-driven specialist journalism.
Right.
Where someone will always be looking at key issues in how to run a business. What is a key issue of running a business? Well, you have to have books that are up to date. You have to have financial reports. And a journalist who doesn't know how to look at that will see an Auditor General's report and not actually appreciate some of the key areas to look at. So that's one major area that we can improve on. In addition, of course, to we can only hope and beg and appeal to the current government to implement the access to information law. This is not for journalists. Access to information which will enable anybody, any member of the public to have the right to request or to check information, to look for information that is pertinent to public accountability. So Graham, maybe when we leave here is one of the issues that we have to take up again.
Yeah, I'm very worried that access to information hasn't been mentioned at all with the new government. Whereas actually we were seen to be moving towards, again, slowly regulations and implementing the law last year, and Parliament was adopting regulations. But now there's no talk of recruiting an access to information commissioner. But really, if the new president wants to make sense of her commitment to fighting corruption and declaring corruption as a treasonable crime, you have to be doing the things that make transparency and accountability work in practice. And whistleblower protection and access to information are fundamental building blocks in that we can't do without. And you can't just say, I'm personally against corruption. That's taking us back to President Bahamba when he said, he had zero tolerance for corruption. But then in his time, the fish rot scandal developed over his 2 terms. So, the rhetoric is not good enough. We have to see the action. We have to see something happening in practice.
What about the anti-corruption? Unfortunately, we contacted them too late and they weren't able to accept our invitation. But what about their role in the whole scheme of things?
Well, theoretically, they have an absolutely crucial role. But I think what's happened, and we've seen this in things like the Afrobarometer surveys, so I'm not just alleging this, is that we've seen public confidence in the ACC ebb away over the years. For whatever reason, that they're focusing on smaller cases, that they might be politically influenced, that, they possibly also don't have the resources to do certain things. So, at the moment, we need a revitalized ACC, really. Yeah. And it's a general problem with our institutions that we have to make sure the issue of leadership and ethical leadership is really crucial to public enterprises, but it's also crucial to all our constitutional institutions like the Ombudsman, the Auditor General, the ACC. You've got to have the right leaders in place. Otherwise, they tend to go backwards or they just don't have an impact. And so selecting the right leaders and getting the process right for selecting the right leaders is absolutely crucial. And that's a very fundamental basic governance issue, I suppose.
Yeah. Is there something you want to add to that?
Yeah. To use an example there of the ACC and how the public can lose confidence. You might remember, was it the year before last year, the ACC cleared the MD of NAMCOR and said he's ignoring the board and approving funds to be paid to Sonangol was to save the country. But we know that to this day, that money has not come back. I think it's more than 100 million, if I remember correctly. I suspect that money is gone with some crooked people, because they said the money was paid by Sonangol to this joint venture called Sangura, and somehow NAMCOR is struggling to get that money.
Yeah.
So how can you be struggling for 2 or 3 years to get your own money back?
Yeah.
So if you have the ACC so rushingly clearing officials, it obviously will continue to create lack of confidence in such an important institution.
Yeah. I heard some snickers and laughter in the audience. Yeah, maybe we can throw it out to you, or if you have questions. Welcome, by the way. I don't know if I welcomed you first in the beginning. Do you have questions, comments? Yeah? Yes? Mr. Galloway.
Thanks, Hitler. It's on.
Yeah, now it is.
Thank you very much. Steve Galloway, I'm a director of NICG. The panelists have been talking about the last 10 years, and I think have raised very relevant issues, particularly since PEGA came into place 6 or 7 years ago. But I'm going to put them on the spot, and I'm going to ask them to comment on the last 100 days, because it's the last 100 days that could determine the future of this country. If you break corporate governance down to its simplest definition, which is ethical and effective leadership, and Mervyn King always says, you can't legislate for ethics. I was delighted to hear the president yesterday announcing governors, and one of the key attributes she ascribed to the selection was ethics, ethical leaders. Graham has been talking about the right people in the right places. So 100 days is gone. The scorecards are in. The self-scorecards are in. I would like our panelists to comment on the 100 days in terms of what signs they see in terms of our topics tonight: corruption, ethics, putting the right people in place. What are the signs that we're seeing in 100 days? And does that give us hope more than what we've seen in the last 10 years for a better outcome?
That's good. Thank you, Steve. Gentlemen. Oh, maybe let's ask if there's more people who want to ask a comment, and then we can answer. Anyone else? No? All right. Who wants to go first?
Well, sure.
Yo.
I sometimes think maybe I'm just too cynical or too harsh, but if one of the first major cabinet decisions was to impose a CEO onto the board of MIDCO for simple reason that we might lose votes or is a fellow comrade onto the board of MIDCO, that on the first month, in the first month of the cabinet, for me is a telling statement. It means we have political leaders who actually don't care about governance, basic governance guidelines of having checks and balances. Why do you have a board in place if you can still tell the board who to appoint? And I think the board had a good reason. Look, this person has presided over government bailout of 1.2 billion. Can we go out into the market and see if we can find someone else? So by the 100 days, I think a lot more has already shown itself that we have seen too many ministers just stepping in, like one minister saying, well, I'm ordering the traffic police not to arrest or the 7-seater drivers, or I'm going to make a law that owners of the cars are the ones who have to. So I just get the sense there are people who are excited with the power that they got and they want to use it willy-nilly. So that worries me about what comes in the next 4 years and 9 months.
What about some of the things that have been happening? What happened? Who? Like I think the latest headline was the NIDA one, or.
It's difficult to judge some of these things because I think what happens when you say, which is a good thing to say, you've got to perform in 3 months, is that some people start running around like headless chickens and they're just noisemakers trying to get attention, and they're not necessarily being effective. And I'm not really sure what to make of James Senkwata's, what he's doing with local governments, because he more or less admitted today that it's a political thing that he's doing. He's targeting opposition-controlled councils because he doesn't think they're as well run as SWAPO councils. Well, that's going to get us into problems. If he could be fully dissociate from that party political agenda and say he was definitely going after corruption at the local government level, then I think you would get our support. But the other thing is that he's also, at the same time, maybe rightly criticizing the ACC for its inaction and ineptitude. And he's also sort of filling a gap that should be actually have been filled by a proper constitutional body that should be doing its job. So I don't know what the outcome of all this will be, whether it really will be better governance or whether it's more of a play before the local and regional elections. And then, the sacking of the Engineering Council, it seems very unilateral. It seems, from what the outgoing members are saying, very problematic. It may also be to do with corruption. It needs further investigation by journalists. But it worries me, again, that what's happening is that to try and impress their boss, they're just grasping the tools of power and using them, but not necessarily in an effective or sustainable way that's going to improve governance over a longer period.
Yeah, the one I was thinking about was that the smelter thing in Tsumeb, the Sinomine, with Mr. Emmanuel.
The new Justice Minister.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he may well be acting correctly there, and then obviously it's a bit disturbing what's happened there is that the whole purpose of that smelter seems to be changing now that it's fallen into the Chinese company's hands, and it's clearly going to have an impact on the workers. And what worries me is since a lot of my family's from Tsumeb, is that Tsumeb has depended on the mines around Tsumeb and the smelter so much that if something goes badly wrong there, the town is going to really suffer as well.
Steve? Yeah, go ahead.
And generally, if we are talking about inculcating a culture of ethics in Namibia, I think we need to start afresh as a whole country.
What does that look like? What do you mean?
Too many people, I feel, or Namibia has become a country where too many of us want to line our pockets, especially people in top leadership positions. So the example that we set for the younger generations is that we should be self-driven. We probably need ethical classes in school as early as primary school. We need classes about loving your society. We need economics information about what happens when you are grabbing all of the resources, because I cannot be better off without making you worse off. It's just a simple fact of life. I mean, there's only so much water circulating around the world, and therefore, the more water I get, the less water someone else will get, and so on with the rest of the resources. So that's I feel that sort of broader common good thinking
Right.
is getting less and less.
But you're talking about starting from scratch. What does that mean? Or you mean we should start implementing some of these things? Is that what you?
Well, I'm talking about just basic discussions like this, as I mentioned,
Yeah.
ethical
Yeah.
classes. I mean, ethical lessons in schools.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think we're losing our way in a major sense.
Okay. No. When you say, I thought I was worried that you meant like, sorry, people must be all fired and we must hire all kinds of people again. No. I was just trying to conceptualize what you meant with starting afresh.
Yeah, no.
Okay. All right. Graham, do you have any comments or any?
Well, I agree that perhaps the most fundamental issue is ethical leadership. So, however we can create discussions around that, raise awareness, do civic education, education in the schools through bodies like IPPR and ICG, the media, and so on, the better. But I mean, President Geingob had this saying of systems, procedures, and institutions. That's what he was trying to establish, because he didn't want it based around personalities. So that if a good person leaves an office, the system is still good, and therefore things won't collapse. And that's also what we need to think about. And I think he was absolutely right with that phrase. I just don't think we've been very good at putting it into practice. But we still need to build those, particularly the institutions that are independent, that are courageous, that are willing to call out wrongdoing, no matter where it's taking place or who might be involved. And the media has played a crucial role in that in Namibia during the independence period, because I think the general tendency in government and political parties is to try and cover things up. So I think the media has tried to expose as much as possible. But, we need to take these tasks that we have as organizations very seriously so that we can get to a better place. And, when you have a president who's saying all the right things in terms of being anti-corruption, we just need to perhaps open a conversation with her and some of the leaders about, okay, let's make this work in practice. Let's involve the private sector. Let's involve the leading public enterprises and so on, so that we can actually tackle these problems.
Yeah, I think that was going to be my next question. Like, what would that look like? What would we need to see to have that assurance that, anti-corruption is being taken care of and that we are building ethical structures? What is it that we would want to see in practice? What is it? And looking at the current structures that are being put in place, what are some of those that are showing positivity? I think maybe the spin off, what Steve just asked earlier, like, what would we want to see and what are we seeing right now that could show? Oh, go ahead, Steve. Maybe say that again. I don't know if your mic was on.
Before they answer the question, if I could ask a follow-up. We've often, and if we assume that ethics is the underpin of corporate governance, and we as an institution have often been prompted to set up, if you like, an ethics chapter within our organization. In other countries, one has an ethics institute. In South Africa or in Africa, there's the Business Ethics Network Africa. And given the small size of Namibia and this sort of ethics topic being top of mind most of the time, what do our panelists think about the NICG actually assuming some of the sort of development role, the custodianship of that ethics underpin? Or do you think a new institution needs to be formed up to really be the custodians of ethics?
Definitely think the NICG can play a crucial role here. We're a small society. We can't keep creating new bodies, and the number of really committed people on these kind of issues is quite few. We have to get more people involved. So you've got a good basis in the NICG. Build on that and expand the work and broaden it out on these ethical issues. I think you could do a lot there, and you can gain a lot of support and probably resources as well to further do that work. Yeah, so it's absolutely crucial that we use the civic space we have in Namibia, because for all our problems, we are still a functioning democracy. We have issues, yes, but and other countries, the civic space is being cramped and disappearing. Other countries quite near to us, so we need to use that civic space that we've got to really have civil society in its broadest sort of understanding and interpretation to be really active and fill that space and make sure that we're using all the powers that we have to and not simply just complaining, but to try and spread the sort of word in an educational way as well.
Yeah. Do you want to continue that or add?
I guess with that NICG, if you haven't done so already, work with NCCI to promote this ethical culture within the business community, and I guess NCCI have parastatals as memberships, the SOEs. So you could make a great impact already working through that, even with the lawyers' institutions. I mean, we've recently seen how lawyers charge an arm and a leg, and one wonders whether these charges is what the legal institutions allow, or is it just a free for all? And some of this boils down to ethical behavior. We reported recently about the Namibia Tourism Board members just going on a massive travel and S&T financial claims. I mean, geez, I would think there must be some ethical discussion to be had in those kind of instances.
Yeah. So I guess I still come back to that question, and you are bringing such great points, and you highlighting really crucial issues. What does that look like practically? Yes, we can have dialogue and conversations, but what are the outputs or outcomes we want to see for us to have that assurance or that safety that, corruption is being taken care of, that, ethical structures are being built? What does it look like? I don't know if...
Well, we have to have engaged citizens, really, who will force these issues into the forefront and make sure that bodies like the ACC are effective and accountable, and other bodies in this sphere as well. So as I say, we do have the civic space, so let's use it. And let's call people out and institutions out when they're failing us.
Yeah.
And as I say, I think the media does a certain amount of good work in this area, but I find a lot of people self-censor themselves in Namibia. And I get told sometimes by my relatives or people around me that I'm too outspoken. Well, why don't I just shut up and I might get a nice consultancy in government? And, but then I wouldn't be being true to myself.
Right.
So I need to be outspoken on these things without being crazy and going over the top, which, we do have some commentators in that category. But, so we just need to speak up on the crucial issues, and we need to perhaps organize in groups like NICG and other civil society groups, IPPR and so on, to be able to keep raising these issues, keep also suggesting alternatives, different ways of doing things. Looking internationally, there seem to be less good examples internationally, but there still are some that we can look at and say, we don't need to copy this, but we can adapt elements. We're going to have to do that in oil and gas now, because so many bad examples of oil and gas governance. Maybe we keep talking about Norway. There's probably a few others where we can learn some lessons and incorporate them. So, these are the things we're going to have to do across a lot of sectors in the future.
Yeah. Are there any Namibian public enterprises who are doing this well, who are, in terms of transparency and accountability and ethical leadership? Do we have any good example?
The new ones like NAMRA seem to be okay at the moment. But what worries me is that when I think, oh, this one's really doing well and there's something positive happening here, then the next week there's a negative headline in the paper and there's a new scandal there. So I don't think we have really a lot of examples that we can hold up, but we can perhaps look at elements of what they're doing in their performance that could be at least praised to some extent and replicated. But I don't feel very confident to say there's any outstanding examples.
Yeah, well, I think there are some parastatals who I would say
I like how you
may
use
have a good basis, and all they need is encouragement.
Like,
Well,
I think
the rankings that you're talking about will encourage them, because when IPPR did that a few years ago, the PEs were calling us and saying, "We are now number 5. We want to be number 1. Please help us to get to number 1."
Right.
So that competition between the PEs seemed to actually be quite a good thing. And some of them were saying, "Yeah, well, okay." We said, "Look, if you just publish your annual report in a reasonable time frame according to the Companies Act, then you're gonna get more marks." So that sort of thing that the NICG can also be involved in could help.
Yeah. What about the MBA though? I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I thought they're doing great. No.
Well, I also didn't want to mention any, but
It's important that we also mention when people are doing great.
sure. I mean, GIPF is not a parastatal per se, but you get a sense that this is an institution that at least does go a long way to provide information regularly, as quickly as possible. So I guess power to a certain extent, although now and then we expose their shenanigans. There are some that really are doing well. But then even a MIDCO used to be good at some point. But what we need to encourage is institutions to just have those standards.
The
I mean, the base. The rules must stay the same. You can't leave it to a minister to be good so that the institution that reports to her is that good. And then it falls flat when there's a new minister, or when that minister falls sick or something.
Well, okay.
I mean, we should discourage the fire. We should stop discouraging people like Nikembwa from serving on parastatal boards. We need more of such people. And instead, the politicians are actually making it difficult, and they're making it seem as if there are not enough good, skilled and ethical Namibians around. It's just ethical Namibians don't want, as
their reputation.
as they say in Afrikaans, what is it?
I don't know if this is the one that you wanted to say, but that's the one I could think of now.
Or pigs, isn't it? If you roll with the pigs, you also can expect to be muddied. So I think there are examples. It's just they are so far and few between that people get discouraged even to try.
I'm a believer in affirmation and, I don't know, highlighting what's great as well.
Yeah, well, that's your job, I think, at NLPG. You can tell us about the good examples. I mean, yes, I think NamPower, they used to come top of our rankings, or MTC if you consider them a PE. And obviously they're doing a lot of the governance things correctly. So we shouldn't dismiss that. It's just that occasionally they do seem to get into a tangle, but then they're big organizations, so it's hard for them to avoid some level of controversy. But yeah, I accept that there are good examples, and we should try and promote them as well as calling out the bad examples.
Yeah, no, we're certainly looking forward to doing that. And we are looking to start sharing that information about that shortly. I mean, hopefully before, this month ends. The governance ranking that we are doing with our NICG members and a lot of the public enterprises. We discussed this briefly when Louise was here at the last session. that, you know, the EU has sponsored such an exercise, and it's not going to be just with, you know, the public available information, but also we actually looking to engage these enterprises and the private entities to, you know, to actually interview and discuss and get information. So hopefully we can raise the level of governance and raise the awareness around what good governance looks like. So are there any comments before we start wrapping up, because we have 10 minutes left? Any comments, any questions from the audience here, the audience online? NICG team, do we have any questions online, any comments online? You should ask them why they're not commenting on questions. Jokes. Anyway, so I don't know if you could recommend realistic institutional reform to strengthen ethical leadership. And it comes back to the previous questions, like what would you recommend, especially for the next 12 months? I mean, we've talked ad nauseum about, you know, just financial, you know, reports, financial statements. But what else? What would you advise or recommend?
Well, you know, a lot of these things were being recommended by the Ministry of Public Enterprises, which is just, you know, improving the quality of boards, setting standards, having proper recruitment processes for the MD or the CEO and the senior management, publishing all the reports and having access to information within the organization so that all the key information is out there in the public. That builds confidence in an organization or a company. So it's what we've talked about all evening. It's getting the basics right. If you could get the basics right, then you can build on that, and that's where your reputation and your branding and everything else comes from. Mm-hmm. Why do we talk about branding if the core of the organization is rotten, you know? So let's start at the heart of the organization, get the basics right. As I say, I felt we were moving in the right direction. We need to now establish if there's no centralized oversight of PEs, how is this going to work? How are we going to maintain some momentum and actually get these basics correct? Because I don't believe that all the individual ministers will be able to, or even have an interest in making sure these standards are kept.
Mm. Could one not say that, you know, there was one body looking after all of them, and now you have, you know, a few with one body, so that, you know, there'd be maybe better focus, because they can do what the Public Enterprise Directorate was doing, or, you know, and now they have fewer entities to look after, which should make it more efficient?
Well, yeah, they only had 22 or whatever commercial enterprises under the Public Enterprises Ministry or Directorate. So that shouldn't have been too hard. But, you know, as I say, I'm worried about all the other 70 or so that exist there without much scrutiny. Mm. And that's where we need to get a lot better at looking at what's going on across the whole. Well, I don't know whether it's called them PEs or state-owned enterprise anymore. We seem to be drifting back to SOEs now. To say we're going back to the pre-2015 language and approach. But we need to know, I mean, we have to shine a light, and accountability, access to information is crucial in all of this. So once we start doing that, and we can start insisting on basic standards.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Mpali.
I think if we don't keep getting back to why do we do what we do, we will probably not get things right. Why are we starting this parastatal?
Yeah.
Why do we have this parastatal? I mean, if the department says they want to ensure that state-owned enterprises are placed in a position where they are well managed and not presenting a financial burden to the state, why are we not sticking to that? If the department says they have introduced generally accepted common principles of corporate governance, why are we not seeing that coming through? So again, that base, the foundation, we just have to get back to the foundation. Otherwise, we will keep proposing new things. Why are we not? And this is what leaders, even ourselves, must always remind ourselves, that I cannot do everything by myself. So same with the government. the politicians are not going to be able to police SOEs all by themselves. They should empower civil society to do that work. And NICG should be empowered to help them do that work. So I think the institutions, or at least the infrastructure, is there to enforce good governance. Let's just get them operational. And key eventually is, because it's human nature that some people will always take a chance,
Yeah.
let them be made to pay for the consequences. Let
Yeah.
them know there are consequences. The SME bank people stole money. No one has been charged. We're not even talking about people who have fled. Not a single charge has been laid so that the police can start going after these criminals, basically. So money disappears and no one is held accountable. Very often people resign, fired, or then they get recycled to somewhere else. What would they do? They will go and do exactly the same things that they have, the same mess that they have caused elsewhere.
Yeah.
So without those basic issues in place, standards, processes, systems, processes, and institutions run by competent people
Ethical people.
and ethical people, and then consequences for those who step out of line.
Good.
Without those,
Yeah.
I think we will have these conversations
Yeah. But not
year
yet.
in, year and
Yeah.
out, and we will not make any progress.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you, Jim. I have a comment from the audience. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. Not so much a comment, maybe a quick question, if I can.
No, last 3 minutes. Yes.
All right. So I think Mr. Ampade and Mr. Hopwood, you've been on the forefront of holding institutions accountable for quite some time now. Maybe just a personal question: have you found that those efforts have borne much fruit, or do you see sort of it's just the same change in people, but the same actions are sort of being replicated over and over? And what works in your experience to have that accountability that delivers lasting results of change?
Well, yeah, we don't really campaign, but we do sort of put out papers and studies and make suggestions. And we found over the years that a lot of our recommendations are eventually taken up. It takes a long time. I even believe our latest one of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative might eventually be taken up. But, so we've seen, particularly under the previous Minister of Finance, a move towards budget transparency, a willingness to try and explain and make more accessible the budget documents to ordinary Namibians. And I think that partly came from a lot of the work that we were doing and the conversations we were having with him and his senior staff. We've seen, I know a lot of people criticize the Public Procurement Act of 2015, but it was a vast improvement on the previous tender board system. It still needs improvement, but the problem there is that it's not being implemented. So actually, I should have said this, another indicator, a red flag of bad governance in the PE sector is that people flout the procurement rules and they don't report as they're supposed to do under the procurement law, so that we don't really see what's going on with procurement in these different entities. So, but we have achieved some progress in that area. So for us, it's about consistency and being relentless. I think that's a good lesson. You've got to just keep on these issues. If you raise it one week and you're pushed back, don't drop it. Keep going, and we'll eventually get to a better position in terms of governance.
Bulldog tenacity. Yeah, I think
Tenacity, indeed. I mean, very often some of my colleagues, especially the reporters on the ground, they get despondent, feel discouraged. Oh, we are exposing this and nothing gets done. We just keep reminding ourselves that it's not our job to set policy. It's not our job to catch criminals. It's not our job to go beyond exposing. And eventually, in a society, if you keep raising the point, eventually something will click. The SME bank story we wrote about for 4 years, criticizing the central bank for allowing the SME bank not to file yearly reports, audited financial reports for 4 years before they realized, well, we were on the right track. The fish rod case, I think we started reporting already at the appointment of the new fish core board who is related to the minister. We started there in 2012. Only in 2019 you see something major like how in which country, I mean, even in the United States now, Trump doesn't even want to enact corruption, anti-corruption laws. But in Namibia, we have ministers who are on trial. So eventually something gets to give. And I think it's because the voters also get that message, and eventually they will take care of the politicians. So we just need to keep going.
Yeah, our time is up, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a very insightful conversation, and I hope that, the powers that be, do take note. And it always comes back to just the basics of governance again. Purpose is why do enterprises exist, and transparency and accountability. And hopefully, like you said, that as long as those who keep quiet, as those who can speak don't speak up, things will just keep going. So we should keep speaking up and keep doing what we do and keep shining the light. So hopefully, that, we will see a change. And I'm always hopeful. Yeah, even if we're moving at a glacial pace. So thank you so much. Thank you for being in the audience. Thank you for all the engagement. And thank you for your time here tonight. And thank you for the live audience as well. Good night. And we're out.